The Pit Press Podcast.
Reinholz launches from downtown. No. Van Horn, no. And that's it. New Mexico wins it.
Kenny Thomas blocks. Gibson hustling down. He has some room. And he gets it. Oh, long three. He got it. Oh, my goodness.
Kendall Williams from 35 feet. For the win. Snell. Got it. He got it. Wow. With 1.8 seconds remaining.
Welcome back to another episode of the Pit Press Podcast. My name is Ryan Tamori, and hopefully I can get names right this time. As always, I'm joined, this time it's nice to have back my business partner in this endeavor, Mr. Eric Moulton. Eric, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Ryan. Ed, Bob, happy to be on. It's been a minute since I've been able to join you guys on the podcast, and we're on YouTube, so glad to be back.
And as always, I'm joined by the voice of the Western New Mexico Mustangs and a Lobo fan since 1970. I'm losing my mind tonight. Mr. Ed Nunez, how's it going?
Got some Giants stuff in the background there. Giants jersey. I just noticed that. You wouldn't mind if I gave you a Cowboys jersey, would you?
No, this one's a terrible joke. And I was on the call with, we had a Zoom when I finally got this room together. I'm not going to show you the number on that jersey. Let's see if I can get his name right this time. Is a very disrespectful thing for me to do. As a journalist who strives for accuracy, he's a former men's assistant basketball coach with the University of New Mexico, Bob Lamphier. I got it right this time, right, Coach?
You did, Ryan. It's great to be with you.
I'm happy to I'm happy you're joining us again. I'm lucky I know my own name and my child's name these days. We had you on back in March, and I don't know, it was a great conversation. So we're happy to have you back on again and talk all things UNM basketball. Gary Colson, who was the men's head basketball coach from 1980 to 1988, I believe he took over after Norm Ellenberger and Lobo Gate. He passed away over the weekend. What can you tell us about him?
Well, I met Gary for the first time in April of 1964. I was a senior in high school in Crown Point, Indiana. And I was ready to go to Ball State Teachers College to play basketball. And Gary had a college roommate at David Lipscomb named Jerry Jones. And Jerry Jones was my junior varsity coach in high school. And he called me up to tell me he was going to go to this small college in Georgia. And the coach there was his college roommate at David Lipscomb. And he was going to take the point guard off my high school team, Rich Jackson, and then a guy named Mike Terry that played at Hammond High in Hammond, Indiana. So we made this long trip, 20-some-hour trip from Indiana to Valdosta, Georgia. And I met Gary for the first time. And as Eric had mentioned earlier, Valdosta State at the time was an NAI school. And loved the campus. It's a beautiful campus in South Georgia. And we had to work out. We worked out against some of his players. And I was offered a scholarship. And I spent 4 years with Gary down there.
You know, Coach, after Lobo Gate, 1979, 1980, Charlie Harrison coached 1 year, and then Coach Colson took over. Tumultuous times, man. Lobo Gate wrecked the program. They were thinking about giving the program the death penalty. I know you remember that talk.
Yeah, correct.
So Coach Colson's style was way different than Norm Ellenberger, way different. They could have been more different than night and day. But what are some of your memories of serving under Coach Colson?
Well, in 1980, I was at the Market Square in Indianapolis at the Final Four. And in fact, Ed, I was sitting with Jerry Jones. He was the top assistant at Louisville, and Louisville won it that year. But I got a tap on the shoulder, and I turned around, and it was Gary Colson. And I didn't even know he had got the job here. And he sat down with us and he started talking to me. I was coaching at West Georgia then, and that's when he offered me the job here. He told me the job was mine. He also told me what was going on there. He mentioned Charlie Harrison, and knowing the pit, I knew about the pit, never been to the pit, but I accepted the job then. And when I came here, the other assistant was, I don't know if you remember, it was Bob Tate. Bob Tate from Loyola Marymount. And those first 2 years were tough, very tough recruiting. We were on probation. It was just hard to get players, knowing that we're on probation. We could not be on TV. And the thing I remember is we were just scrambling, trying to get players. You know, we had walk-ons that came on that year. Dave Duggan was one of the walk-ons. I don't know if you remember, my very first recruit was Alan Dolinsky from Los Angeles. And we had Jerome Henderson and Tony Pursley and your favorite guy, Phil Smith. And then we had, who was something else, we had Kenny Page. He was a handful. So those first 2 years, we struggled. You know, we were 500, maybe a game below 500.
Which, all things considered, wasn't ridiculous. Now, I do want to mention this, 1979, 80, when Lobogate happened, Charlie Harrison takes over. It's all walk-ons. You mentioned Dave Duggan, Keith McGee, Guy Berger played on that team, Tony Goudelet. There's, I remember them all. And so, but I don't think people remember this, Coach. They still sold out, even against U.S. International. I remember there's still 16,000 fans there. It wasn't as if the pit was abandoned, even during the walk-on years when they had no chance to win. And I think people might have forgot that. You mentioned some of the players, how hard it was to recruit. Now, I remember Brad Evangelo came in here with the knee injury. Carvin Blocker came in here injured. Later, Coach Colson would recruit some very fine players. It was tough the first 2 years, but talk about some of the players that you remember Coach Colson recruiting. You mentioned kind of tough in the early years, but talk about some of the players you remember Coach Colson recruiting.
Well, actually, Brad in that group came, the second year that we were here. Brad Evangelo, Tim Fulmer. We brought in 2 red shirts. We brought in Don Berkovich from Michigan State. We bought Mark Snow, 7-footer from Kansas. I had recruited, and I hated to see him leave, and I know you remember him, Ed, Wallace Williams.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing they told me when I first came here was you couldn't recruit Hobbs. They told me that was Texas Tech country. And that's the very first place I went. I wanted to meet Coach Tasker, went down, met him. And Wallace was a good player, but he had his moments with Phil Smith, and he left, after the first year. But I think the best year is my third year here, when we started to build a program, and we brought in Hunter Green. We bought in Kelvin Scarborough. We bought in George Scott. We bought in Mike Winters. I think that's really, Ed, when the program started to move. And Gary was a different coach. When I played for him, he was very intense. And he was both a defensive coach and an offensive coach when I played for him. And if you read Rick White's article at the very end, Gary made the comment, which he made to me several times, about outscoring people. I was more a defensive coach. I like defense. When I played for Gary in Valdosta, I was in charge of the defense. And so I think the program really started to move. Ed, was in '83.
Took a little while, but you're right. And then Johnny Brown came in. Some other good players as well. We did mention this, and I think it's we have to ask this. Lobogate, we mentioned, wrecked the program. 2 years before that, Lobos were ranked number 4 in the nation. Lobo Mania, but you never seen nothing like it. I remember those days. Those media seats were all student seats. Tell us what a tough act Norm Ellenberger was to follow. Even though, remember, he went to court, was acquitted, right? He's facing numerous charges, could have gone to jail, got acquitted. So and was a pariah in college basketball after that. Don Haskins hired him as an assistant. Bobby Knight hired him as an assistant. He never got a head coaching job again. But his memory still rings here for the older people to remember. But tell us a little bit about what a tough act he was to follow, and he really still was.
I like Norm. I met Norm. Spent many a time with Norm. When people ask me about coming here, I tell them probably the only reason I'm here is because of phone calls. That with the FBI when they tap a telephone. And so I thought Norm was a great coach. You're right. His style was a lot different. I looked at a lot of films of him, stomping his feet up and down, and so, and a lot of people still talk about the Cal Fullerton game, which so many people mentioned, that they thought that, something was going on with the game. But I've been in those type of games. I watched that tape a couple times. And it's just one of those games where, some of the players for UNM just couldn't get going. But, following Norm was tough. But again, Ed, I think the toughest thing was being on probation. I'm trying to think of the player. I think we only had a couple players that came back, which was Jerome Henderson, who I heard he's passed away. We were talking about it earlier with Chester Fuller, and Kenny Page and Phil Smith. So he was a tough act to follow. I thought, the NCAA was too harsh on him because you see other coaches that have lied to the NCAA, have, put Calipari, different coaches type of things. But, I just like Norm. Norm was a really good coach.
You mentioned that the turquoise, the shirt open to the navel. Storm and Norman sandwiched at Ned's. The only coach I ever saw have a cheer at the pit. Stormin in the pit. I never forgot it. Flamboyant, right? A personable guy. He was loved and still beloved by people that remember. There's a lot of people that have passed away, but the people that remember still love the guy, even though he wrecked the program. He did. We have to say this is the truth. He put the Lobos in a deep hole. Coach Colson did have some success in getting New Mexico to the NIT tournament, but he couldn't get the Lobos over the hump into that NCAA tournament. What is it you think? For me personally, you mentioned the defense. He said that. He said it himself. I want to outscore. And Bob King and Norm Ellenberger had established defensive teams here. And I think that kind of rubbed some people the wrong way, that maybe they lacked that toughness. They were in the WAC championship against Wyoming here in '88, right here at the pit. And they came up short. And afterward, a couple weeks later, Coach Colson was let go. What is it you think his teams lacked in making that final leap over to the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, it's a couple things, Ed. I called the NIT the Nobody's Interested tournament. The people in New York City, the people that run the NIT, they got all the money. I mean, it was just teams, that happened to be picked up at the time. And I don't want anybody to think in a bad way of mentioning Gary's name. I always thought he had the talent to win the WAC. He had the players, but for whatever reason, they couldn't win it. They couldn't win the tournament. I think one time they got in the finals, of the tournament. And I think I'm not sure, it might have been Wyoming that beat him, but I just think that a combination of things with Gary. He was, like I said, at Valdosta, he was very intense. When I was a junior and senior at Valdosta, we took him to 2 straight NEI national tournaments. And then he took the Pepperdine job. And he actually asked me to go out to Pepperdine, but I just got married. I just lost my dad. So many things were going on. And people, I don't know if you remember, or Ryan might remember, maybe Ryan's too young, but Pepperdine was in Watts. It was on Vermont Avenue in South LA when he first went there, before the lady gave him think it was over 600 acres, there in Malibu. But when Gary went to LA and got around Jerry West and the different things, I think that's when Gary just got, a little, not lazy, but just in a sense of coaching wise, you got to be intense. Even though when I came here in 1980, Ed, I came here to win games. I didn't come here to lose. I'd never been involved in a losing program, going way back to high school, junior high, all the way to the 2 division schools I worked for. But it's just if you look, I think Gary just was, a little laid back. I sat next to him many times, and even Rick Wright put in an article. When I don't know if you caught it, but when he put his head in his hands, and just nothing was going on, at that time. So, I just think that he had teams that could go to the NCAA, but for whatever reason, they just couldn't get the wins when they needed them.
One quick comment, then I want to turn it over to Ryan. Ryan, Ryan's got some questions for you too. But
Sure.
It's hard to come from a guy with Norm with the intensity that he had, and the players he had. And we found out later they didn't have GPAs. We know all that. With some of them didn't, some not all of them, but yes, they had intensity. Those guys were killers. I remember killers, and their defense. They, Coach Wisnett was the defensive coach. They played defense. So I think I don't know that. And you mentioned Coach Colson hanging around Coach Jerry West. Jerry West they portrayed him in winning time as some lunatic. He's not a lunatic. He wanted to win, though. He was intense. So I know Jerry West was a mentor. Coach Colson worked with Jerry West. So I get some of those things, but I think I think a lot of people perceived it as not tough enough. That's what I think here. It's not tough enough. But anyway, Ryan, go ahead. Sorry about that.
I think my first question, well, I was going to jokingly ask what your name was. I'm still sorry about that. Sorry about that. That's the first.
You don't need to be sorry. Right?
In the 9 months of hosting a radio show, I never got it wrong. And I think since we've been doing this for 9 months, 10 months, I hadn't gotten anything wrong. So I'm not going to sleep. I'm going to lose sleep over that. And these guys will attest to that. That's not BS. Do you think it's funny that everything gets a gate, like Lobo Gate, Spygate? That's a bad question. Never mind.
No.
Did you? Just after Watergate, everything gets named Gate. That's just, and I still think to this day it's funny that it's Lobo Gate and then Lobo Mania. Did you catch any of the men's exhibition games or the home opener against Texas Southern? And if you did, what were your thoughts?
I was at the Highlands game and I was at last night's game. He's got some players. And I told Ed earlier, I think one of the problems Coach Patina will have, and it's not a bad problem to have as a coach, is keeping everybody happy. Because he was running players in and out last night. I mean, you can't gauge on Texas Southern. Yeah, they won the SWAC, but they had 2 pretty good big guys, but they never put. I don't know why anymore. They don't put people on the blocks like they used to, and Texas Southern is not going to be a test for them. St. Mary's is going to be a test for them when they go there. But he started 3 guards last night, and I went to practice last Saturday, and that's what I saw. Dent, Mashburn, House, and Joseph in the center, and then he moves kind of the forwards. But he's got some talent, Ryan. It's just he's going to have to decide somewhere down the road who's going to be his 5 and who's going to be his 2 or 3 off the bench, because he's going to be playing some teams. He's not going to play 12 players like he did last night.
We talked about the teams that made deep runs in the tournament last year with UConn. I can't. This is where the history comes out, and the New York Football Giants fan and then the Dallas Cowboy fans will, the two here will probably attest to me. I think one of the more dominant runs in the history of sports, and somebody might disagree with me listening, is actually the 1991 Washington Redskins. If you look at that, and then with all the history that I love, you look at that UConn team. That's not here nor there. But San Diego State was deep. UConn was deep. Miami was guard deep. If this season goes as planned, and then a national pundit, John Fanta, I think is his name, picked them to go to the Final Four. I made the joke earlier in the day. I was like, I haven't had an alcoholic beverage in over 2 years, but I want what he's drinking. And then Patino in the postgame said, I want what he's drinking too. So I thought that was funny. But when you have, sorry for this long-winded question, but when you have depth like this, and it's kind of a cliche question, do you pivot yourself on the college basketball chess table of this is how we make a deep run in March?
Well, I don't know who that guy was, but he wasn't taking his medicine that day, because I think we will be in the top of the Mountain West, and I'm not sure that's where they're going to be, but he's going to have to decide sometime down the road who's going to be his people, and then there's going to be some people on the bench that that are not going to be are not going to be happy. So it's Ryan, it's a little too early to tell exactly what's going to happen, but as I mentioned earlier, St. Mary's is going to be a test. I mean, that's what we got to look at. How are we going to match up against St. Mary's there? So
people are saying that's that's the mid-major game of the year. And whatever, everybody making the joke of whatever drugs John Fanta's on, or he's a Fox Sports pundit. His Final Four is Arkansas, Michigan State, Creighton, and New Mexico. I'm sure he was getting a lot of flack last night after James Madison. Ed, I think you were going to ask something. I'm sorry.
Real quick, Coach. I thought last night you mentioned depth. They had Mushila in there, and he's guarding guards. And I thought he had some problems guarding in space. Now he's more of an inside guy, but he's 6'4", and yes. But he did his job at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. I don't know how much he's going to play, and I like him. I do. But Baker, I thought might be in there a little bit more. Played 15 minutes. So and then Toppin in Washington, they're going to play. They're going to play. Now Applehands came in and Hunter Green called it a great confidence builder. How much is he really going to realistically play? 6 minutes, if that, maybe. He can shoot, but can he guard? And one of the things you said last year was they had problems with defense. I thought they turned it up. They've got that depth. They've got the speed. They've got the athleticism. Some of that last night was pit energy. You've seen it. The adrenaline flowing, right? We're going to play hard in front of the home folks. Now, we'll see how that translates on the road. But I do like this group. I do, but you're right. There's going to be some players looking down the bench and looking at Coach Patino, like, when is my turn and when is my chance? And there's going to be some grumbling. That's the way it is when you have that deep of a squad. Only 5 can play at one time. So we'll see how that plays out.
Exactly. It's a strange game sometimes, Ed, because you think you've got it figured out. You think you've got your best players, out there, but somebody, will step up. I'm trying to remember the one kid I was really impressed with, and I think his number was 11. I mean, I didn't have a roster, and he had a couple blocks.
That's Quentin Webb, and then there was
Quentin Webb, the redshirt freshman.
Yeah, he had a couple blocks that were amazing. And I didn't think his goaltend was a goaltend, but he'll Coach Patino will figure it out. He will figure it out, and we cannot let in the Mountain West. We cannot let games get away like we did last year. I mean, they're going to have to go on the road and win. Some of those losses, Nevada, others.
Utah State was a bad loss.
Yeah. An Air Force.
Started one other quick point. Sebastian Forsling. I've been I've been on him. Hey, I'll tell you what, I thought last night, using your size pick, roll to the basket. He got 2 buckets, and that's something we hadn't seen him do.
Right.
We say that if you're gonna be big, play big. Otherwise, what good does it do to be big? And last night he got a little winded, but I got to say that at least I saw him pick, boom, roll to the basket, catch, finish, and that's
Right.
something we didn't see him do last year. So that's encouraging, I think.
Yes. Yes.
I'm not a real big social media guy, but I love his dad on social media because he's
Oh.
he's in Sweden, and he's taking pictures at, like, I don't know what godly time of the hour. Coach, we're gonna have to do this again. We appreciate your time.
Oh, no problem, Brian.
Bob Lamphier, not Bill Lamphier. I don't know what the hell I was.
You're good. Don't even worry about it.
Well, we appreciate your time and your insight. Thank you for joining us.
You bet.
Thanks,
You bet.
Coach.
All right, welcoming another guest to the show. Played men's basketball at New Mexico in 1982 to 83, 84, 85, where he played in 61 games for the Lobos and averaged 12.2 points a game, 6.2 rebounds per game, and he still calls Albuquerque home. His name is George Scott. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you. How are you guys doing?
Well, we appreciate your time and harassing us as well. Gary Colson, he was the men's head basketball coach from 1980 to 1988, and he took over after Lobogate. He passed, sadly, over the weekend. What can you tell us about him?
Oh, boy. How much time do you have? Gary was a super, super nice guy. Very genuine, great sense of humor. He really cared about his players. He's going to be terribly missed. He's the guy that rehabilitated the basketball program from Lobogate. So the university, the Lobo fans, the state of New Mexico owes him a huge debt of gratitude for pulling us out of Lobogate, because that was just an unmitigated disaster, as everyone knows.
What can you tell us about the game in 1985 against top-ranked Georgetown, which featured, you're talking to a New York Knicks fan, far and few between in this state, but featured Hall of Fame center Patrick Ewing. How loud was the pit that night?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. I've never heard that place that loud before or since. I'm told that there were 19, maybe 20,000 people squeezed into the pit that night, and that the fire marshals were kind of looking the other way because it seems like the whole town was there. People were standing in the aisles, which is a fire code violation. People were standing around the top of the pit because there were just no seats, and everyone wanted to be there. That was the must-see game of the year, of that season, and everybody wanted to be there, and I think everybody was there, it seemed like.
George, I was there, and you were right. That place was a madhouse that night. 69-63, Georgetown finally comes away with the win, but it said in the paper the next day the Georgetown players couldn't even hear themselves in the huddle. That's how loud it was. And you held your own against Patrick Ewing, and again, Reggie Williams, Michael Graham. That was a Michael Jackson, a very good Georgetown team. So it was a great memory for you in the pit. And and they had 19,000 against UNLV in 1976, and they had said that was never going to happen again. But that night you mentioned against Georgetown, it did happen, and the fire marshals looked the other way. George, you played with some of the greatest Lobos in UNM history: Hunter Green, Phil Smith, and the late Kelvin Scarborough. That still gets me right here. What can you tell us about him?
Well, Scar was just one of a kind. Probably the best athlete I've ever played with. He could run, he could jump, lockdown defender. He did it all. Pressure never got to him. It just seems like the more pressure, the more tighter the game was, the more he wanted the ball and basically wanted people to follow his lead. Or sometimes he would tell us, give me the ball and get out of my way. George, crash the boards. Johnny Brown, Hunter, you guys crash the boards. I'm going to make something happen. And he generally did it. Guy was just an amazing athlete. A lot of people don't know this, but he was a very good football player in high school too. We used to screw around over in Johnson Field, playing touch football, and he was a great football player. He could run, he could pass, good blocker. He had no problem tackling. Wow. He was just an all-around athlete. Sorely missed, very sorely missed.
We mentioned Phil Smith and Hunter Green as well. What can you tell us about those two outstanding ball players?
Hunter was a freak of nature, 6'7" guard, one of the original 6'7" guards. He could defend, had those long 40-inch arms, good defender, good three-point shooter, led the conference in steals a couple of 3 years. It just goes on and on with him. I think Phil was probably one of the best or the best Lobo players immediately following Lobo Gate. Guy was fearless. I remember us going into Provo to play BYU or to go into Las Cruces to play New Mexico State or El Paso to play UTEP. The guy was fearless. And we just followed his lead. He was 5'8" on a good day, but he had that New York attitude. He feared no man off the court or on. So we generally followed his lead.
It's funny. He's still the same way today. He's still fearless, right? He's still got that, the New York persona.
Oh, yeah.
I just talked to him a little bit before we got on here, and he told me to tell you hello. And I got some other news for you about a former Lobo player that I'll share with you in a minute. But
that's my kind of guy. New York mentality.
Oh, you never, like George said, Phil was fearless, and he would fight anybody at the drop of a hat. He didn't care. A Norm Ellerberger guy. He wasn't recruited by Coach Colson.
Right.
And man, he would. I saw him. I played with a lot of ball with him at Johnson, and I saw him almost get into a lot of fights. Get into a few fights. That was Phil. He wasn't going to take any what he thought was crap from anyone. One of the toughest Lobos and one of the best Lobos we ever saw for sure. George, you mentioned what were some of the biggest Lobo wins you can remember when you played? There was a lot of them. What were some of the biggest wins you can remember?
Well, the one that immediately comes to mind is my senior year playing in Las Cruces. Neil McCarthy was the coach, God rest his soul. We beat them in Cruces. As I recall, the game went into overtime, I think, but we wound up winning by, I don't know, maybe 9 or 10 points. And Coach McCarthy was so pissed off after the game, he wouldn't let them leave the court. He made them stay on the court, and he made them practice in their game uniforms after the game. Now, mind you, we had already went into the locker room. We had showered. We dressed. We were waiting for the bus to take us back to Albuquerque. So imagine our shock when we walked outside or walked back onto the court area as we're waiting for the bus, and they're practicing in their game uniform. So we're making faces at them, and we're laughing and joking and slapping high fives while they are practicing after the game in their game uniforms while we are waiting to board the bus back to Albuquerque. I will never forget that. That was great, So that was a huge. That was probably my favorite win in my career at UNM, just because it was against New Mexico State, our dreaded rivals. The fact that their coach humiliated them in front of us, and we are watching, making faces at them, laughing, pointing at those guys. So yeah, that was crazy.
You never forget it when you beat the Aggies, George. That's you never forget that. That's it was an intense rivalry back then.
Yeah.
George, I interviewed you and Phil Smith about 2 years ago when Kelvin Scarborough passed away, and again, that's still Kelvin was just, you mentioned, a beautiful person, a genuine guy. But you and Phil mentioned that you think your era of Lobo basketball after Lobo Gate has kind of been forgotten. Do you still feel like that?
Yeah, but that's just life. I mean, the older we get, things get kind of fuzzy and foggy. And then as time goes on, you get the Kenny Thomases, the Luke Longleys, the Kahari Jacksons, the Charlie Thomases. Time marches on. I just think that's just a normal progression of life. That's just the way it is.
The two things that are undefeated in life: sex and father time. If you were able to catch the opening game on Monday night with UNM as we embark in this 2023-2024 season, they opened up against Texas. God, I almost said Texas A&M. I'm on fire tonight. Texas Southern.
Right.
UNM played great defense last night, something they did not do well at all last year.
Right.
What were your first impressions of this team on opening night?
My first impression was our depth. We have a lot of very good ball players. We look to be about 9 or 10 deep. And we were just coming at Texas Southern in swarms. We were swarming them. They never knew what hit them. And then Coach Patino, he would put fresh bodies, fresh legs into the game. So we always had fresh guys out there. So we kept the heat turned up with fresh bodies out there. Last year, we didn't have that luxury. So if we can do that the entire season, that's going to be huge, especially when we go to Utah State, when we go to Nevada, when we go down to Las Cruces. Basically, wherever we play any tough road game, if we can have 8, 9, 10 guys deep, constant fresh bodies on the floor, that is a huge advantage. Huge.
You kind of already answered my next question, but if you know anything about number 23 St. Mary's, they go to Moraga, California on Thursday night. You kind of just mentioned it, depth on the road. This is a very tough test. This is, I think, the first time in 20 some odd years that Gonzaga has not picked to win that conference. But if you know anything about St. Mary's, and I know you just mentioned it, how can UNM get a win on Thursday night in Moraga?
Well, first of all, it's going to be tough only because we won there last year. And I know for a fact, being a former player, they have that game circled on their calendar. So they're waiting for us. So it's going to be a tough win. Again, I like our chances just because we have added reinforcements this year. We have a lot of horses. So hopefully lightning will strike twice and we can pull off a second straight shocker. That'd be great. I think we have a pretty good shot at doing it, but it's going to be tough. It's going to be real tough because they are waiting. As we speak, they are waiting.
You have you've played in the college game. Obviously, it's probably evolved over the years, but when you have two true freshmen in there like that performing last night, regardless of what Texas Southern record was, I think they've gone to three straight NCAA tournaments. How do you overcome those nerves in that game as a true freshman, and does it kind of go away after you get into the rhythm of the game?
Oh yeah, those nerves are going to always be there. I remember telling Ed last year, or maybe the year before, that I remember the first time I ran down the pit ramp for a regular season game, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I've never been so terrified in my life because, in high school, you get maybe 500 people, 750, maybe 1,000 people. So to go from that to 18,000 people, I thought that I was going to lose it. So for me personally, it took me maybe 3 or 4 games to get acclimated to that, to get used to it. but eventually I got to the point where I started liking it. And if we didn't sell out, I was a little disappointed. If we were playing Eastern New Mexico or Western New Mexico and we only got, quote unquote, 14,000 people, I was disappointed because I went from being terrified to being disappointed if it wasn't a packed house, because when the pit is full, that place is electric. You can feel it in the air. And that's something that we all love, and the Lobos have always used to their advantage.
You kind of mentioned it, and talking to players throughout the generations. I mean, how special of a building is that?
Oh, it's amazing. There is no place like it. I've been to a lot of arenas, even back in the day, the Marriott Center in Provo, Utah, home court of BYU. That place seats 22,000, as I recall, but even at that size, it didn't have the magic, the electricity of the pit. And I think that's because the fans are so close. The fans are right there practically on the court, and that makes a huge difference. And as players, we can hear stuff. When I'm shooting free throws, I can hear people making comments and, saying things. And during a really quiet downtime, we could hear people cough or even clear their throat out there, So we're very aware, very cognizant of what's going on in the audience, in the crowd. So that's a huge advantage for us, especially if that place is rocking and the Lobos are on an 8, 10, 12-point run. Oh, my God. Building swing, rocking. People are clapping, stomping their feet. There is no place like it.
Ed, Eric, do you have any other questions?
I do, yeah. In last year's matchup with St. Mary's, that was kind of Donovan Dent's coming out party, right? Like they went with that 3-guard lineup. St. Mary's really struggled to kind of cover those guys, and they didn't know too much about Donovan Dent. And now I think the secret's kind of out on Donovan Dent just with his early season success.
Yes.
What are your thoughts with Patino going essentially small, right? Because you have House at 6 foot, you have Mashburn at 6'2", and Dent 6'2". What do you think about that?
I personally like small ball because I played against small ball when I'm trying to chase some 6'1" or 6'2" guy, baseline to baseline, sideline to sideline, through screens, through picks, and it's exhausting for a big guy like me. So I like it because I think it's a great advantage. At least offensively, it's a great advantage. Now, of course, the downside is you don't have as much size on the defensive end for rebounding. But I personally like it especially because Donovan is a good rebounder. I was watching him last night, and he just has a nose for the ball. I'm not sure how many rebounds he had, but he just seemed to always be picking off the defensive rebound. So, again, I like it. I think we can do great things with our quickness.
Yeah, I think you just mentioned like the defensive side and kind of that's kind of the sacrifice you make with the size. But last year we didn't get to see the Lobos press as often as I think they had hoped,
right?
Probably due to depth,
right?
But they pressed almost 3/4 of the game, and it was really effective from my perspective. What were your thoughts?
I agree, and again, that goes back to my earlier point of we've got depth, we've got fresh bodies, 8, 9, 10 deep, and it kind of reminds me of what's the coach from Arkansas, Nolan Richardson, with the 40 minutes of hell. He always kept a long, deep bench, and he kept the heat turned up. So hopefully we can do something like that because we've got the quickness, we've got the depth. If it works out, that's going to be a huge advantage for us. So I'm hoping we can do that. And plus, it's more of a exciting game. I think the fans like to see the run and gun as opposed to walking the ball up court and trying to throw it inside to the big guy. When you're running and gunning and pressing and trapping, it's more of an exciting brand of basketball. And I think that's what sells tickets in this town.
Real quick point there. We saw that last night, George. Pit energy, They got out and scored in transition, easy buckets. I think Toppin is going to be a big key. He's got a lot of energy, can block some shots. He's athletic. So I think with Washington, they've got the depth. Coach Lamphier said that just a few minutes earlier. That might be a problem. You're not able to play everybody. There's 8 or 9 guys that can play. Some games he's going to play 8. That's it. But it's a problem a lot of coaches wouldn't complain about having. I'll tell you that.
Yep, that is a great problem to have. I was telling someone that after the game because, a lot of the internet buzz and a lot of the talk now is about, are there enough balls to go around? Are there enough minutes to go around? That's a great problem to have. So Coach Patino is going to earn his paycheck, managing balls, managing minutes. But hopefully he'll be able to do it because if he's able to pull it off, I think this is going to be a record-setting year. I really do.
Nelly literally just stepped foot off a plane, like a week and a half ago. He might not even have 10 practices under his belt. What were your first impressions of him?
He's here 2 weeks today, by the way.
2 weeks. Okay. What were your first impressions of him?
Well, first and foremost, I like his size. As they say, you can't teach height. So he's got good size. And after watching him last night, I still think he's getting his legs up under him. I don't think he's in shape yet. We've got this altitude here in Albuquerque. But he averaged, 15 points and 10 rebounds last year for Iona. So he has the chops. He can obviously play. I just think it's just a matter of him getting acclimated, to the climate, the elevation, his teammates, learning the plays, and just learning Coach Patino. But, 15 points, 10 rebounds a year ago, that speaks for itself, So he's obviously a proven Division I talent.
I think you already answered this question that Ryan asked earlier, but your impression with the freshman, Coach Patino in some recent interviews has kind of alluded to Toppin and Washington having this junkyard dog kind of effect out there, right? They're gonna get out there, they're gonna out physical you. They're not afraid to kind of jump in there and basically throw some elbows if they need to. What do you like about their game?
Well, haven't seen a lot of Washington to really have a intelligent opinion, but Toppin, my God, he is scary. He is scary good. To be a freshman, what is he, 17, 18 years old? I've been really impressed with him. He attacks the rim hard. He shakes the backboard when he dunks. Kind of reminds me of Charlie Thomas, Ed. Remember the way Charlie used to shake the backboard?
Oh, he was a beast, man.
It's like Toppin's like he is punishing the backboards, like he's mad at the backboard, thunder dunk. So if he can stay healthy, I think we're going to see some great things out of him. I really, really like him.
He is a former UNM basketball player, 1982, 83, 84, 85. His name is George Scott. I want to get you fed, but we really appreciate your time. This is definitely one of my as I talk to a lot of former UNM athletes, there's one in my book because I've known him. I had classes with him, and he's very candid about how Steve Alford used to kick his ass. It's Daniel Harris. That is a close second, maybe up there. This was a great conversation. We appreciate you joining the show.
Thank you. And I appreciate you guys having me. Ed, as always, I'm always available. I'm a little hard to reach, and I got a full-time job. I've got children, but eventually we always connect. And if you guys want to ever have me back on, just holler at me.
I guarantee we will. I guarantee it, George.
All right, sounds good. Hey, you guys have a good evening, and thank you again for having me. I appreciate it. Go Lobos.
Thanks, George.
Thanks.
You're welcome.